Mike, do you want to introduce your buddy, who we are blessed to have because we need more inkers on this show?
We need more inkers, or tracers, as Kevin Smith calls them. Gary was the longtime inker on Nexus over Steve Root's pencils for many years. And believe me, there is no tougher job because Steve Root is very particular about what he wants. And Gary did an outstanding job for dozens and dozens of issues. Gary's the guy that wrote the book on inking. In the 80s, he lived in New York City trying to break into comics and would hang out with Keith Giffen and
Ernie Colon.
Right.
I think Todd Klein was in that group as well, the letterer.
Oh, right. Todd Klein.
Oh, wow.
We should, you know what, we got to interview a letterer one of these days, but today is not that day. Today we're talking to Gary, who has stayed active all these years and distinguished himself as one of the greatest inkers in the biz, and you can see a little bit of his work there in the margins because Gary is preparing an art book of his own, which is now funding, and we will post the link to that. And what's uncanny about Gary's work here, and it's only shared by a handful of great artists, is that when he draws a person, he absolutely nails it. There's no ambiguity about who he's drawing. In Gary's case, it's almost photorealistic, although these are not taken from photos. But I can only think of a handful of other people who have mastered this skill. Drew Friedman is one of them, and a couple others. But I mean, you know what I mean. Mort Drucker had it when he drew for Mad Magazine. Of course, Mort's drawings were exaggerated in the caricature style, and Gary's are not. Gary's are ultra realistic.
Yeah, well, you cannot put me in the same class as Mort Drucker. He was amazing.
If you would ask Mort to draw somebody and say, I want a picture as close to the way they actually look, super realistic as possible, I have no doubt that he'd nail that too.
Oh, yeah, he could do it. Yep.
Gary, you've done some caricatures, haven't you?
Yeah, although to me, that's harder than to do realistic.
I agree.
Because you're exaggerating, but yet you still want to maintain the likeness. And that's anytime you do any kind of portrait and the person that you're doing sees it, that could be flattering or it could be an insult, depending on,
Right.
how they view themselves. Because, we see ourselves differently than the world. I do a lot of portrait commissions. I'm working on one now. And you never know if they're going to like it or not, because it's how I see them.
You can imagine the fear in medieval artists' minds when they're commissioned by the king to do
yeah. Exactly.
And Gary mentioned that he prefers to ink the old-fashioned way with pen and brush.
Yes.
He does not use digital inking. Gary, why don't you describe your process when you're inking work today? Because it does involve electronics.
I don't use any kind of digital for the creation of the work. I'm still old-fashioned pencil in the ink. I'm probably 90% brush. I don't use Coquills that often. I still use them, but not as much. I use modern pens, like if I'm ruling a line. But 95% of what I do is with the brush. And part of that is just me being stubborn, trying to hang on to the traditional techniques and not sucked into the modern siren of digital inking.
Do you sketch as well?
Yes. I think it's old-fashioned, that drawing and figuring things out with the pencil and put my ideas down on paper. And then, that's the first step. Going from there is getting the composition. And then I'll do a tight drawing. And if I'm doing portraits, I do use photo reference, especially if it's a portrait of, a real person. And then I'll do most of the, real tight, detailed work in the inking stage. And that's done with my brush. So like I say, I'm probably 90% brush.
So all this cross hatching we see, that's done by hand?
Yes, and that's all brush. I don't cross hatch with a pen. For some reason, I have better control with a brush than I do with a pen, and I can't explain it. I have more confidence with the brush. but that has come from literally years of practice. With a pen, it's a different feel. It's just like the difference between drawing with a pencil and inking with a brush. The feel is completely different.
Right.
There's pressure on the paper that you feel with a pen or with a pencil. With a brush, you hardly feel anything, and it's kind of a eye-hand coordination thing. So it's more of an intuitive thing, which means it's inconsistent. And some days I think I'm an inking god, and other days I want to quit. It's that inconsistent.
It's very consistent.
Yeah, yeah, especially when you do the cross hatching. Is your style that you prefer to be as perfect as possible, or do you like some of the randomness?
I tend to like the real crisp, Joe Sennett, Brian Boland,
Yeah,
that kind of stuff always appealed to me, and that's what I strive to do, and that's just my natural tendency to be loose and impressionistic. I have to work at that. So inking Steve Rude was, doubly more difficult for me because his stuff is more, Alex Raymond, looser, and
right.
my tendency is to tighten everything up, and that's not Steve's style. So inking Steve wasn't as hard for me because it is not my natural inking style.
Well, you
Yeah.
look at the material that Dude inks for himself, which he's been doing for the last 20 or 30 years, and the inks are very tight.
But there's still a lot of looseness there.
Yeah, that's true. The layouts.
Yeah, and I think that's, to me, that's a purest form of inking when Steve inks himself. Guys like Wally Wood and Frazetta and Williamson, those guys had a random, loose, controlled line. So it was spontaneous and controlled at the same time. And that's what I wished I could do. I can't do that. I do a lot of recreations where I'm trying to mimic those guys, and I still don't know how they do it.
That looseness, I think, is integral to one of the most advanced forms of illustration because we can all agree those guys you mentioned, as well as Alex Toth, had an indefinable quality that
Right.
was uniquely comic booky. And that's one of the reasons that people love comics and prefer comics to fumetti. Fumetti is using photographs in lieu of drawings and just taking pictures of whatever you need and slapping word balloons down on them. It's not fun. And one of the appeal of comics is the aesthetic that we see at work. And you know what I mean? When you see an artist that just drills it, like Steve Rude or Frank Frazetta, or any of those guys, like Paul Galassi on Master of Kung Fu, you say, holy shit, and you fall in love with the artwork. The story is almost secondary. In fact, it's usually secondary because very rarely does the writing rise to the level of the illustration.
That's surprising to hear a writer say that. Because then in comics, the writer's the king. The fans think that, the companies think that, the editors think that. I never understood that. Most of the comics that I bought, it's not because of the story or the characters, it was because of the artist.
Same with me.
A lot of times I wouldn't even read the dialogue. I would just look at the artwork. And you could tell what's going on.
I
But
would read the
Nexus
dialogue.
was the exception. Nexus to me was the perfect marriage between story and artwork. One complemented the other. And that's the ideal situation in a comic book. But that's, in my opinion, that's rare.
Thank you, Gary. And since you mentioned it, we are going to crowdfund a brand new Nexus graphic novel that's illustrated by Kelsey Shannon later this year. And I've posted some of the art before for people to look at, and everyone who sees it has been blown away.
Oh, Kelsey is an amazing artist. He's on the draw stream that I'm on every week, Graybeards with Aaron Lopresti and David Williams. And Kelsey is just the stuff that he comes up with. It's magical. It really is. So
he's in that category of people we've been discussing, like Alex Raymond and Alex Toth, Wally Wood.
Yeah, he's so versatile, and he also does digital coloring, and his coloring is phenomenal, and I
Yeah,
don't use that word loosely. He thinks outside the box. He doesn't do the traditional, image style coloring. Not that I have anything against that, but to me, that's kind of, commercial. He takes it a couple levels above that,
I
and
agree.
is very creative in his artwork.
Gary, have
Yeah.
you done any covers?
I did some recently for a military magazine. I illustrate for the American Legion. One of the clients involved in that publishes a veteran stories magazine. It's called Full Mag Veteran Stories Illustrated, where the stories are basically interviews of the veterans and you just illustrate based on their words.
Well, we'd love to see those covers. Have you
Yeah.
posted them anywhere?
Um, yeah, they're on my Facebook and
Okay.
Instagram. But
Yeah.
yeah, I did two covers and a couple of stories and in the interiors, and they're all from veterans, and some of them are from veterans from World War II. There was one guy who survived a Tiger tank attack. Building they were in was being flattened by a Tiger tank, and they had to make a quick stage right exit out the back window.
Uh,
The dogs are
uh,
here. The dogs are
yeah.
here.
How did you get into inking?
When I was learning or trying to learn how to do comic art, Mike, you probably experienced the same thing. You draw your own stuff and then you ink your own stuff. And I quickly learned that I like the inking part of it better. I enjoyed the inking part. The drawing part was work for me. The inking part was fun. And if I was doing a comic page, I would, as an example, I would draw one panel on the page. Instead of drawing the whole page, then I would ink that panel before I would draw the next panel. And it's like, it can't be the way you're supposed to do it. It's because I couldn't wait to get to the inking.
Right.
And once I figured that out, that I like that process, that's when I started concentrating on the inking. I think it was more of the art form, just that severe black and white, graphic image always appealed to me. And even to this day, I prefer black and white illustration over color.
Yeah. I wish we had more black and white comics nowadays.
I
Well,
agree.
it only works if you have an extraordinary artist and a decent story, because we've all seen tons of black and white comics that looks like they were drawn by children.
I agree. Yeah, yeah. I agree with that too. But there's a few of them out there, and a lot of the artist editions that IDW and other publishers have put out.
Yeah.
Those are pretty cool. And more publishers are starting to put out black and white editions of color stuff, and a lot of the reprint stuff. A lot of the Marvel and DC reprint stuff is in black and white.
I did a series with Paul Galassi for this publisher that did. I'm drawing a blank here. Big publisher, whose name began with a V. And Jim Shooter, yeah,
Valiant.
Vanguard.
Vanguard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was Valiant. It was Valiant.
Valiant. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they did it as a cost cutting measure. But in Paul Galassi's hands, there were no cut corners, because you look at his black and white art, and it was just as hard hitting, if not more so, than his color work.
Yeah, Paul likes to use dramatic lighting, and when you do that in every single panel, then it's not realistic because
Yeah.
who has that stark lighting on them all the time, but it sure works in comics, and it sure works in to add dynamics to storytelling, mood, and all that's cool stuff.
There was
Oh
some of
yeah.
the
The
greatest
Kevin
comics I've
Nolan
ever seen. Kevin
Yeah, the
Nolan.
Kevin Nolan lighting, like, it reminds me of someone in a room and there's a flash of lightning outside the window,
Yeah.
and how it lights the room. Then he uses that in every panel. So if you're trying to be logical about it, logic goes out the window. But it's so dang cool that who cares?
That's right. You don't care about whether it's realistic or not. You enter into that panel and you're just rapt because of the art that's being presented and the way it's being done. Wally Wood, of course, was a master of that.
Right? Yeah.
And there was a Canadian artist named Rand Holmes, who
I'm not
was
familiar with him.
Oh my God, I'll send you some stuff. He was to Wally Wood what Paul Galassi is to Steranko. I mean, his work was impeccable. It was just magnificent. He did a lot of work for Kitchen Sink Publications. I worked with him for a couple of times. He lived on an island off British Columbia. Never made it big. Just came and went without a blip, which is a shame because he was a world-class artist.
I had a conversation with Kevin Nolan about his lighting techniques, and I remember telling him that I was looking at a Frazetta comic story where some guys were like around a campfire, and I'm looking at Frazetta's rendering, and it reminded me of Kevin Nolan, and it's like Frazetta swiping Kevin Nolan. Well,
I
you
doubt
do the
that.
timeline.
Yeah, yeah,
Nolan wasn't born when Frazetta was
yeah.
doing that. So I asked him, "Are you influenced by Frazetta?" And he's like, "Hell yeah, I swipe Frazetta like crazy." And I'd never heard that. I'd never made
Yeah.
that connection,
Well,
and
you
so
yourself have recreated Frazetta paintings in black and white.
yeah, like he freely admits it that that he swipes for Rosetta, and so we think Nolan is unique, but who is unique?
You learn from whoever and studying stuff, and then you see something new, and I want to try that, or
Or you
you
think
just
you're
kind of
inventing something, but
right.
you're not.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah,
I got to say, I think there are many unique artists, and the proof is that there's so many of them that we can identify with just a glance.
Yes.
yeah.
John Byrne,
Yeah.
Frazetta, of course, Alex Toth.
Yeah, and they're the ones that us lesser mortals, need
Aspire
to
to.
exactly.
He's Gary's only semi fantastic.
Yes. So I'm an amalgam of everybody that I swipe.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
that you have your own look now. I mean, I advise anybody to go to your Facebook page, just scroll down.
Well,
yes, yep.
that kind of happened when I started doing these pieces, and this kind of leads into my art book. About 10 years or so ago, I started to do I called them superhero portraits, mostly, close-up face shots for conventions because I wanted to sell 11 by 17 black and white prints to be different at Comic Cons. Most people would sell either 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17 color. So I decided, okay, I'm going to be different. I'm going to sell black and white. And so I started doing these portraits, and I thought, okay, I want to be consistent. And so that's where I came up with that kind of crosshatch style back then. And over a period of about a decade of doing a bunch of these for conventions or private commissions. I collected over 100 of them that I'm putting in this art book, and this is what will help fund me to do a graphic novel. And this is my first crowdfunding. I'm completely new at this. Um, it's totally intimidating to me to do anything like this. Mike, I don't know how you do it,
Well, I
but
could do it by myself.
Yeah.
I have a genius in charge of my campaigns. But you say you want to do a graphic novel. Can you tell us what it's about?
okay, that's the main character. It's called Astro Gal, and
Mhm.
this is Aaron Lopresti's got Kit Carter, and this is like his new project.
Right.
Kit Carter is more tongue-in-cheek, fantasy, Wally Wood kind of fun. This is more dramatic, realistic. It's set in the near future, so it's like dramatic adventure, and it's just about her. There aren't any crazy blob aliens or things chasing her or anything like that.
Are you the writer?
Yes, and it's a project that I've been thinking about for a while. I haven't written it yet, but I want it to be a graphic novel. The idea of my first crowdfunding, creating a graphic novel and doing the artwork and crowdfunding from scratch is like, I couldn't handle that concept. So I decided to do an art book of artwork that's already completed, and I just have to put it together. But there's probably 4 or 5 pieces that I still have to do for the book, but it's over 100 pages, and the artwork is mostly completed.
You
So
know,
that makes.
there are firms that specialize in helping you crowdfund.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
There are firms businesses.
Yeah, but I'm a cheapskate. I mean,
Oh,
I'm
Yeah.
fair
really
enough. No, I
I
just
don't wanna
mentioned it.
give any of that money to anyone else. So I'm gonna do the shipping myself, I'm gonna package all the books and all that because I need as much of that money as I can to help fund the Astrogal graphic novel.
Sure.
And that's my goal is I realize that most people they want characters, they want comics that they could read and interesting characters. Not as many of them want art books.
Right.
And so the art book is going to fund my graphic novel. I wish I could do it the other way around, but the graphic novel is my main goal, and that's the reason why I'm doing the art book.
How long do you think it'll take you to finish the graphic novel? What you're
Oh,
thinking of?
sheesh.
Can you have it done next Thursday?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good question, and I think I actually haven't even thought of it because of everything that I would have to do.
Right.
I right now I just have concepts written down on scraps of paper. I don't know how you write, Mike. Like during the day, whatever story that you're thinking about at the time, you get an idea pops into your head. How do
Well,
you?
I always carry a pen and pad with me at all times
Okay.
for those
I don't.
moments.
See, I'm not that organized. So I'll grab a paper lying around and write down, it would be cool if and write down a
Yeah.
concept. And so I have a whole bunch of those piled up and I'm starting to write these they're basically like scenes, things that I think I would because I'm illustrating it.
Right.
I'm motivated. My story's motivated by what I want to draw. I would like to see this character in this situation because it would artistically, I think that would be dynamic or cool, and that's what drives my story. And so I'll
Right.
think of these different scenarios and craft the story around that.
You
Are,
sell originals, don't you?
Yes, most of my art uh, is up for sale, and a lot of the pieces that I've done for the book, I'll do and then put up for sale, like as an example, on Facebook or Comic Art Fans, and then I'll make prints, and so it some of these pieces just keep paying me. That's an excellent situation where someone buys something that you've done years ago and you're still getting money for it. So that helps put food on the table.
have you decided or thought about how you want to do the panel layouts?
I tend to be drawn toward Kirby style
Yeah.
storytelling,
Yeah.
fewer panels, big images, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'll probably average like 4 panels a page. I may
Yeah.
do more than that every once in a while, but it'll be mostly, and my character is going to be on Mars and to show, to answer your question, the landscape of Mars and her the vastness of the terrain that she's in the middle of. That would be a way of doing it. Having close-ups would not convey that. So sometimes you have to pull back and do that. But I tend to like big images and I'll do that as much as I can. But I want Mars to be a character in the story.
And I guess we'll be getting lots of 2-page spreads.
Yes, I love those. I love
Yeah.
those. But again, not gratuitous.
Right. Just but
Uh,
for the landscape and stuff. Yeah.
whatever's called for.
Did you
I
say
know
your graphic novel is going to be in color, or is it going to be black and white,
it will be
or are you going
color.
to have
Yeah.
two versions?
No, it'll
Okay.
be color. I will not be coloring it. I'm hoping. I haven't talked to Kelsey about this, but I'm hoping Kelsey Shannon will color it. He's my
Yeah.
number one choice. But there
That
are
would be
other
awesome.
good color artists out there, but Kelsey is
Oh
my
yeah.
number one choice. But he's very popular, so
Has your style changed at all over the years, or has it pretty much? And I mean, like obviously, like the more you do things, the better you get. But I just didn't know if there's been any change in your preferences or
are you
anything.
mean inking style or
Yeah.
drawing style?
Yeah.
Inking style?
Either one.
People tell me I have an inking style because they see Martinisms. I don't see Martinisms, and that might be true of any artist. I don't know.
Well, your pictures are so accurate that it
Yeah.
may be that your style is no style.
Well, my philosophy as an inker is to give the pencil artist what he wants and not try to put my stamp on it.
Yeah.
Some people say that, like, it doesn't matter who I'm inking, they can tell that it's me, but that's not something I'm trying to do. I'm trying to fit my techniques to the pencil artist. As an example, I mean, we were talking about inking Steve Rude. I would prefer to ink Steve more of a Joe Sennett, real tight.
Yeah.
Steve doesn't like that. He likes some of the Joe Sennett qualities, but he doesn't like the real tight inking. So that's an example of me trying to, being more flexible and
Yeah.
giving up my preferences for the penciler because I know which side of my bread is buttered. Somebody buying a comic book that's interested in the artwork, they're not buying it for the inker. They're buying it for the pencil artist or the writer.
Every now and then they get somebody like Vinnie Coletta to ink Paul Galassi. And when that happened, I felt I was unhappy. It pissed me off. I said, and I'm not saying that literally. I don't think it was Vinnie Coletta, but he was often matched with inkers that were not appropriate to his style. And you just look at it and you think, what a waste.
Yeah. And a lot of that, I think two reasons: time issues.
Yep.
Editor
Who's
trying to,
available?
meet a deadline, and so they hire an inker that's fast. And the other is probably more prevalent is editors that don't know what they're doing. And people take that for granted, but especially today, most editors really don't have a background in art or writing or comics or
Absolutely
so
true.
we won't. Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother subject, but
or storytelling.
That part of comic art of penciling and inking, it's really a specialized art form and not that many people have a handle on it. And if the editor isn't steeped in comic history, because most editors aren't artists, there's a few exceptions, but most editors are not artists. And most editors don't understand that the penciler inker, dynamics. And that's part of the problem is that they hire who's standing in front of them at the time. And I saw that often. If you're in the right place at the right time, you get the job, not because you're suited for it. And in comics, the process of the penciler inker relationship is essential in the package. And that's something that's taken for granted in at the highest levels. And I've been on both ends of that, where I've not received jobs that I should have, and I've received jobs that I shouldn't have been assigned. As example of that, early in my career at DC, my first work was at DC Comics, and I was living in New York and going down there to the offices about once a week, hanging out with the editors, and they would give new artists background gigs of like mystery stories, like Ghosts, House of Secrets, Unexpected, that kind of stuff. Those were anthology books in the mid 80s. And they had a lot of different artists drawing those stories, everyone from complete new green pencilers to veterans. And I was a green inker. I had no idea what I was doing, and I would be in the office. Dave Manick was my editor at the time, and for some reason he latched onto me, and he would give me work, and he gave me a couple of Steve Ditko stories to ink. Wow. And I knew I had no business inking Steve Ditko. I mean, even then I had a realistic opinion of my own work, but there was no way I'm going to turn down a Ditko story. Right. So I don't remember the issue numbers, but I did 2 or 3 Ditko stories, backup stories, and I look at them today and I cringe. It's like I would really like to get a hold of that, but that's an example of me being standing in front of him when he was trying to assign an inker for it. He's like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" Hell yeah, I want to do it. Yeah. And that's more often is how they assigned work to inkers. But I'm saying, now would be different. I would like to do it now. Back then, I was still feeling my way, and I really didn't know what I was doing, and I knew I didn't know what I was doing, as I was faking it, pretty much like everybody else is trying to get into something. You act like and that's what I was doing.
Well, how did you become an inker? Did you study art?
Well, I think with comic art back then, you have to be self-taught. The Kubert School didn't exist. There weren't specialized schools for it, and I took art classes in college and showed my instructors what I was trying to do, and they had no idea how to guide me because it's very specialized. And so I would go to conventions and show my work and to artists and guys like Ken Macklin and Steve Leoleha and Al Gordon and Brent Anderson. I grew up in California in the San Jose area, and so the Bay Area was the conventions that I go to, and that was the Bay Area artist crowd back then. And they got to the point to where pretty much all of them said, if you went to New York, you could probably get work as a background artist, and then learn inking that way. And then Terry Austin came to town to do a San Francisco convention, and he did a book signing at my local comic book shop. And so for some reason nobody showed up to see him. And so he was a captive audience. I had him for a couple hours to myself. Nice. And he said that he would give me critiques through the mail. This was before the internet. He would give critiques through the mail where he'd send me Xeroxes of pencil pages, let me ink them like on tracing paper and send them by mail back to him. He would critique them. So he went home from the convention. A couple of weeks later, I got this package in the mail with John Byrne X-Men pages, pencil page Xeroxes, and Michael Golden's Star Wars pencil page Xeroxes. That's the stuff he was working on at the time. And so that's the stuff that I got to practice on.
Wow.
It was amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I got to the point where he said, you know what, you need to come to New York and I'll take you around to the different Marvel, DC offices and see what they say. I did that, went to New York, he took me in, and again, they all basically said the same thing. If you were here in New York, you could probably get work as a background inker and learn the trade that way. And Dick Giordano was also someone who said that. So I went home, sold all my possessions, which wasn't much at the time. An MG Midget was like the biggest thing I owned.
And it wasn't very big.
Yeah, moved to New York and started working as Dick Giordano's assistant, where he paid me, because of his high page rate, I got more from him than anybody else. It was $12 a page to ink backgrounds.
Wow.
And I could do, on a good day, I could do 2 pages a day. Living in New York at, 20 some odd dollars a day wasn't easy, but that's back then. That's what I had to do to break into comics, and I just kept doing that until like editors like Dave Manick started giving me full inking jobs, and then I just kind of grew into it from there. And it took years. I was in New York for 6 years until I was getting assignments, Doom Patrol and stuff like that, and then I moved back to the West Coast.
That's got to be a big thing for Terry Austin, because, like you said, not too many people buy because of the inkers, but I think I don't know how many people actually would buy because of his stuff, but if they saw that he was the one inking the artist, I think it helped seal the deal sometimes.
Oh, I did. I looked for his work, and he had a very distinct style, and I bought everything that he inked.
Yeah. I remember hearing his inks over most others people's too. And he had a style similar to yours, in which that it was very smooth and accurate. It didn't have these sketchy lines like an amateur would.
Yeah, so he was a huge influence on me because I was doing background inking when I first got there. I studied his inking style because he was known for his crisp and detailed backgrounds. The Superman, Spider-Man Treasury book that was drawn by Ross Andrew, inked by Dick Giordano, and the backgrounds are inked. All the backgrounds are inked by Terry Austin. That was my Bible of background techniques. And I stared at that for hours and hours and hours. I ended up doing a similar type of job years later. The Batman Hulk team up that DC published, that was drawn by Garcia Lopez and inked by Dick Giordano. That Treasury, the backgrounds are mine. I inked the backgrounds. I shouldn't say they're mine. They're Garcia Lopez's, but I inked the backgrounds. And if you have that treasure edition and you flip through it, look at the backgrounds, there's a lot of street signs and billboards that have my name on it, and I cleverly snuck in. But all those techniques that I used in that are from Terry Austin.
even though he kind of had his style, he was very versatile to be able to ink over many different pencilers.
Yes, yes. And that's, you have to give up your ego if
Yeah.
you want to be an inker because you are secondary. You're supporting the pencil artist, not just for the fans, but also to make the penciler happy because 9 times out of 10, if you make the penciler happy as an inker, he will request you again to the editor, and that's what you want as an inker. Here's a inside tip to you aspiring inkers out there: make the penciler happy. He will ask for you, and a lot of times the editors will listen to the penciler and they will hire you. A lot of editors have their own stable of artists that they want to use, but I probably got most of my gigs from the penciler.
Good advice, just like in marriage too. You got to make them happy.
That's right. That's right.
And you want to get paid too. So keeping your coworkers happy is a good thing. So I guess we can talk a little bit about your campaign real quick that you're doing. As you said, you have the art book. I put the thing on here. I'll post it bigger for people to see too. But the Fund My Comic .com, if you go there and look it up and you look up Gary's name, it does say on here it's campaign number 298, Brush with Destiny, the ink art of Gary Martin. And then he will be I guess flowing from that into his graphic novel when he
and there might be a break. I've had a lot of requests to publish or reprint my inking book.
Yeah.
Dark Horse was the original publisher, and they don't publish it anymore. And I have the rights to it. And I had about 8 copies left over that I included in the campaign, and they sold out right away. So I've been getting encouragement to do a crowdfunding campaign for the inking book, and I'm considering it. I haven't made up my mind yet, but it's something that I might do. If I do it, it will probably be in between the art book and the graphic novel.
Okay. And you did say, weren't you saying you were getting help from somebody who also include tips on digital inking?
There were a few different versions of the inking book where each time it was reprinted, we added new material.
Right.
And the last version of it, we added a chapter on digital inking. And that is not written by me because I don't know anything about digital inking, but it's very complete and it's a lot of advanced stuff. If you want basics on digital inking, there's a ton of that kind of thing on YouTube, and the stuff that's in my book is more advanced stuff and trying to achieve line weights and stylized look that the traditional comics have in the inking art styles. If you have the version, or if you have the inking book and it doesn't have the digital inking chapter, then you have an older version of it.
And it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah, especially if
back in the plastic bag.
Especially if you still have the blue line art boards in it that you can practice on.
Wow,
If you still have those, the blue line art boards, they're made to be torn out and practiced on. So if you somehow can get your hands on a copy that still has those boards, it is definitely worth more. And if I do reprint the book, it'll definitely have the blue line boards.
Very cool. I'm sure you could get a publisher for that, but I know you like keeping the money, so I don't know if you'd want to self-publish that or not.
Yeah, I think it would be worth it to me to self-publish it and keep a bigger piece of the pie. But because it's such a specialized item, it wouldn't have a huge print run.
Right.
Maybe 300 to 500 at the most.
Is this what you mean by the blue lines?
No, in the very back, there's fold out.
Oh, I don't think I have that copy, and I've had this copy forever.
You don't have the first version, Mike.
Yeah, it should be in the very last pages. There were blue line boards that were perforated that you can tear out of the book, and they're 11 by 17, so they're folded in half.
I never got that.
No, Mike has something new to hunt for.
So the blue line boards are definitely for practice, and if I do another version of it, I'll probably add more artwork, more boards to it. Thinking about, like, as a perk, having separate boards that you can buy, so it'll have a lot of that kind of stuff. So if you can
I can put it up there if you want.
Here's an example of the kind of stuff that I'm doing now. She doesn't really officially count as a superhero, but I think a lot of people would beg to differ. This is cross-hatching techniques that I'm using here, and this is all inked with a brush. I don't recall using a pen on any of this and blow it up.
I did see that when I was playing with some of your art, and I'm like, wow, yeah, that's really, really detailed.
So a lot of this is just translating gray tones into cross-hatching.
Right.
And so I when I do my drawing, pencil drawing, I break it down with gray tones. I don't do the line work in the the detail line work in the pencil stage. I do all that in the ink stage. And just breaking down the values from, black, dark gray, medium gray, light gray, and white.
Yeah.
And everything is translated into those values. And that helps me layer the cross-hatching. What areas do I need to be darker by adding another layer of lines? I'm very methodical about this. It's not a random thing where I say, oh, this needs to be darker, let's lay down some lines. I figure all that out ahead of time. So in the inking process, I'm not thinking about that stuff. I'm just thinking about my line control. Everything else is worked out ahead of time.
And you don't like use like a blue pencil or anything to like kind of draw like a guideline or anything. You're just feeling it out.
Well, sometimes I do. Like if I have a certain shape, I want to make sure I get, like her nose as an example.
Right.
That was the main thing I was worried about on this piece, because this is how I wanted to render her nose. But when you start adding lines to noses, they could end up looking like an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And so I inked her nose first, and I thought, okay, I like this, and then I ended up inking the rest of it. But as an example of the gray tone defines the shape of it, and there's highlights in it as well. And to me, that's like complicated. It's all these different light sources. There's underlighting on it, there's side lighting on it, and it also defines the shape.
Are there specific places other than I'm assuming you'd like them to go to your campaign on fundmycomic.com? But are there other places, like you said, you'd like to direct people for, Facebook or Instagram or?
Yes, I'm on Facebook. I've been on Twitter probably less than a year. That's new to me. My Twitter is G Martin Inc. Instagram, it's Martin Inc. Art.
Cool.
So if you want to contact me for any reason, those are two good places to do it. And I'm also on Facebook. I've been on there for a while, and I have galleries on all three of those.
Since everything is getting popular again, I'm hoping that there'll be a little bit of a renaissance of actual inkers doing regular actual inking on on paper and boards.
That's funny you should mention that. That was one of my goals in writing the inking book, is that I wanted people to maintain that traditional old school. And to be honest, I think I failed. If you look at modern websites that like on Facebook groups that have inkers, most of them nowadays are digital.
Yeah.
And when I post something on one of those sites and I tell them the tools that I use, they don't believe me. So it's definitely a dying craft. It's a dying art.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, guys like you are keeping it alive.
Well, I think as long as I'm doing it, as long as I can do it, I'll stay traditional. And that's something that my goal is to encourage people to pick up the brush and practice it, because it's not something you can master right away. It does take time at the drawing table, but it's such a versatile tool that what you can achieve is only limited by what you put into it. And I think that's probably true with anything excellent in life.